Today we're beginning our chapter on American society in the 1800s, and today we're going to be talking about northern cities from 1820 to 1860. So the growth of cities occurs during the 1800s, and it occurs mostly in the northeast of the country. In 1790, there were only two cities with more than 20,000 people in them, New York City and Philadelphia. But by 1860, there are 43 cities with more than 20,000 people. And if you look at that map there, you can see where the major cities of the United States were in 1860. And you'll notice that almost all of them are in the northeastern part of the country. So it happens in the north rather than the south because the south stays committed to slavery and to farming. But in the north, they basically adopt this system of manufacturing known as industrialization, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But there's also a huge population growth, partially due to immigrants from Europe. So let's talk first about industrialization. So basically, there's this thing that happens in Europe and the United States during the 1800s known as the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution is basically this process where new techniques and technologies revolutionize the way in which goods are manufactured and distributed. Basically, it becomes way easier with this new technology to make a bunch of stuff and then to get this stuff to people who want to buy it, thereby increasing the amount of stuff that gets made. So in manufacturing, the process of making stuff, we see breakthroughs including the factory system, steam power, mechanized production, and replaceable parts. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. And in terms of distribution, that is shipping stuff, we see the spread of canals, railroads, steamships, and also the telegraph, which is really important because it allows people to order stuff and communicate with people who might want to buy stuff who are far away. And the effects of these breakthroughs are enormous. There's a huge increase in the amount of stuff that cities can make and sell. And there's also, therefore, a huge increase in the jobs that are available in cities. And so this means that more and more people are moving into the cities to take these jobs, making stuff and selling stuff. But on the downside, there's also a big problem with poverty, pollution, and environmental impact that just sort of naturally happens when you start cramming millions of people into really small spaces. Now let's talk about immigration. So immigration is another thing that helps to cause the growth of northern cities. And it happens mostly because of people from Europe who want to move over into the United States. They come for two main reasons. One is that there is a lot of poverty and instability in Europe. And two is that they believe that they will have a better opportunity in the United States. Basically, that they'll have a chance, at least, to become wealthy. And so immigration is part of a larger trend in which the United States population is growing, and it helps the United States population to grow by 10 times from 1790 to 1860. In 1790, there were 3,900,000 people in the United States, but by 1860, there were 31 million people in the United States. So there are almost 10 times as many people in the United States towards the middle of the 1800s, whereas at the beginning there was not even 4 million people. So that's a big deal, and immigration plays a big role in this. The two biggest immigration groups that came over during the 1800s were the Irish and the Germans. And this was a big change because before 1820, most immigrants to the United States came from England, and they talked and acted a lot like other white Americans. But After 1820, these new waves of immigrants come from different countries and start to shake things up in American culture. The first big wave is the Irish, and this wave of immigration ends up totaling almost 4 million people. And it begins in 1845 with the Irish potato famine. Basically, the potato crop fails, and lots of poor people in Ireland depend exclusively on potatoes to get their food. And so when the potato crop fails, there's nothing left for them to eat in Ireland, and so they flee the country and come to the United States hoping to find work and food here. This means that most of the people who come from Irish arrive with almost nothing. And this means that they don't have any money, so they can't leave the city where they arrive. And so most of the Irish who come into the United States end up staying in whichever city they originally arrived at, whether it's New York City or Boston being the main two. And these guys are basically forced to work the lowest jobs in the cities. They work as servants and day laborers, doing stuff like building roads or working on railroads around the city. The other big group which came over from Europe were German immigrants, and this ended up totaling 5 million people by the end of the 1800s. And this wave of immigration began around 1830, and most of them come seeking better opportunity. It's not so much that there's a disaster like the potato famine in Germany, but rather it's just kind of hard if you're a farmer to ever really make much of yourself over in Germany. It's hard to work your way up. So a lot of them sell their farms and their houses and come to the United States hoping to eventually become rich. And others leave because of political instability, because they're worried that they might get in trouble with the government over there. But so anyway, these guys buy a bunch of land, and most of them can move out west away from the cities, and they set up villages there, and they give America stuff like kindergarten and Christmas trees and lager beer. And there's a image of a poor immigrant family to the right. The effects of all this immigration were many and important. The first is just that there's a rapid growth of cities. Lots of the immigrants, especially Irish immigrants, had nowhere else to go once they arrived, so they stayed in the cities where they originally got to. And this led to a huge growth in the number of people living there. Another thing that this did is it gave these cities a constant supply of cheap workers. And so these guys will take basically any job they can get, and this helps American factories to hire workers and to stay competitive by basically paying them less than they would pay other people. This also leads to increasing cultural diversity. There's an introduction of lots of new ideas, new beliefs, and even new foods. For example, like hot dogs and sausages and stuff were brought over by and made popular by German immigrants. But there's also a negative thing, and that is the rise of what is called nativism. And it's sort of like racism, but it's racism against immigrants. And basically, many nativist Americans did not like the new immigrants. And they didn't like them because they blamed them for increasing crime and poverty and disorder in U.S. cities. Many others blamed the immigrants for taking American jobs, and they thought that if maybe these immigrants weren't coming over, then the native, quote-unquote, Americans, that is, the white people who had immigrated earlier, would be able to get those jobs and maybe make more money. And we see stuff like this. These attitudes are manifested in different forms of discrimination against new immigrants. For example, lots of stores, when they needed workers, would post help wanted signs that said underneath, "No Irish need apply," and you can see that in the top right. And it also leads to a lot of ethnic tension and even some rioting in bigger cities where Irish or German immigrants are beat up, and churches and other places where the immigrants gather are burned. But so now let's think back on the growth of cities. So because of industrialization and because of these waves of immigration, the cities become really big and important. And because the cities grow and become important, the wealth and the power of the northern United States also grows. Basically, the growth of cities leads to the ability for the northern states to produce more. And because they can produce more, they have more money and they're more powerful, and they emerge as really the richest and most powerful part of the United States. The growth of cities also leads to a new way of life. This means that people are working in factories or offices rather than in workshops or farms. People now buy stuff from stores rather than make it at home. And there's also a growth of slums. Basically, poor people in cities can't afford somewhere nice to live, so they live in basically cramped little apartments that are all crammed together. And it's pretty bad, actually. But then, related to the growth of slums, there are health problems. Disease and sanitation issues are really bad. Basically, there's too much waste, too much garbage, and not enough sewage systems to deal with all the problems. So you're starting to see all sorts of diseases and sicknesses cropping up in these growing American cities. And you also see pollution from rapid industrialization. Lots of smoke coming out of people's chimneys and out of the smokestacks from factories. It's not making the cities a really unhealthy place to live. And the cities also lead to new ideas. Lots of American thinkers react to this new industrial world. Some celebrate it and see this as the future of America, and others hate it and instead dream of an America before the growth of cities, where people worked on farms and had their own house and stuff like that. But regardless, the growth of cities makes Americans think about what it means to be American and what they want America to become.